Okay, so in the interest of time, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Bella Alvarez. I'm a program manager at the Intentional Endowments Network, supporting a couple of our different initiatives. And today we'll be focusing on one of our newest and most significant um, work streams, which is our Endowment Impact Benchmark. And I'll hand things over to my colleague Nicole in a moment to talk through the benchmark, what it is and what the assessment process is, but just a couple of logistics. The first part of this conversation will be recorded, and you will all receive a copy of the recording. We're going to have some time for Q&A at the end of the call, but feel free to drop questions into the chat as you think of them, and we will address them. And our panelists, Brad and Kathleen, will be happy to speak to anything that comes top of mind. And then also just to note that this call is in meeting format, so we encourage you later on, if you do have questions, to come off mute and go ahead and introduce yourself and really create a space of community here. So to kick things off, I will turn things over to Nicole Tirico to give us a little bit of an overview of the benchmark.
Great. Thank you, Bella. And we can go to the next slide, I think. So I'll just set some context here at the beginning to share a little bit about the Endowment Impact Benchmark and what the assessment framework looks like, what the benefit is to participating, some of the expectations around participation, and then I'll hand it over to Kathleen and Brad, who will talk about the Russell Family Foundation's experience going through the EIB and a little bit more about just their work and the value they found in the process. We can go to the next slide. So the Endowment Impact Benchmark is a sustainable and impact investing assessment, rating, and benchmarking framework that we developed a couple of years ago now. Feels like it was just yesterday. And we developed it in partnership with Bluemark. They supported the development of this assessment framework. And there are really three main benefits to participating. The first is when going through the process, you receive feedback from Bluemark. They go through the verification process and look at responses and then share how one could score better and improve practices generally. So that's a huge participation value. The second is really the ability to benchmark progress against peers, both in the final report and then hopefully now that we have more of a critical mass participating going into our third year and additional benchmarking data. And then the third piece is optional. It can be a really great benefit if it's of interest, where participants can gain recognition. Everyone gets a rating. You can participate anonymously or be public with your participation. And those ratings are either bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. We can go to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit more about each of those areas as we go through here. So the framework itself that we developed with Bluemark has four core pillars: strategy, management, governance, and transparency. And that's aligned with the TCFD framework. And then the questions and overall framework is also aligned with the operating principles for impact management. And we indicate where there's question alignment with PRI and STARS for those that report to those organizations as well. And there are 32 scored questions and then 21 data-only questions. We really tried to balance kind of having a rich questionnaire where we're gathering as much information as possible with not having too heavy of a reporting burden. So 32 questions was about as minimal as we could go. And through the piloting process over the last couple of years, tried to kind of combine some questions and see where we could simplify things as much as possible. Can go to the next slide. And to try and kind of bring that into reality a little bit outside of just what those pillars look like. You probably can't see this incredibly well, but this is a screenshot of what that questionnaire looks like. So when a participant signs up, they receive this Excel questionnaire. It has an overview tab that tells one how to fill it out, and then 4 tabs you can see at the bottom that align with those pillars. And if we go to the next slide, then within each of those tabs, you can see this is just some of the first questions in the strategy tab, where a participant goes in, goes row by row, looking at the questions, can check responses to each question based on where the participant lies, and then provide evidence and additional commentary to back up those
Wow.
responses. There are examples of what evidence makes sense to provide for each question a little further over in the questionnaire. And then once that questionnaire is completed, it gets sent back to Bluemark and they go through the process of verifying those responses and adjusting as needed. You can go to the next slide. And so, like we mentioned at the top, with those main benefits, one of them being the feedback after everyone goes through the process. There's a final call and a final report that is shared. And on that final call, participants go through the report with Bluemark and hear more about their scores in each of those pillars, what their areas of strength were, and then some areas for improvement to really help continuing to improve their practices. We'll go to the next slide. There's also within the report some ability to benchmark progress against participants. This is a sample of that. I think Kathleen and Brad will share their actual benchmarking that they received going through. And that's by pillar and then by sub-pillar and also at the rating level. I'm going to go to the next slide. And then that optional piece with this recognition of progress and leadership, there is a bronze, silver, gold, and platinum rating within the methodology, both at the pillar level and then overall. And that gives a sense of where one lies in each of those areas. And then we have badges developed to share out and we are hopeful that many participants will. So far, we've had some really strong leaders in the endowment and foundation space participate with some really high ratings, and they've been really enthusiastic to share that progress. And TRFF is one really great example of that, but it's not a requirement to share out. And if one's maybe earlier on in their learning journey and really wanting to go through this as a way to learn where they can improve, but aren't willing to share that they have participated or what their rating is, that's also completely fine. And go to the next slide. So we have seen over the last couple of years that the time commitment for going through this process is about 10 hours over a 4 to 5 week window. So the first 1 or 2 weeks, when participants are going through the process of filling out that questionnaire, gathering all of the evidence, it can really vary how long that process takes. And then going back and forth with Bluemark on the assessment piece, if they have any additional questions, that can be 1 to 2 hours of time, and then an hour at the end to go through that final call and the findings of the report. And the cost for participating is between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on assets under management of the participant. You can go to the next slide. And we've had some really exquisite participants to date. We had our first pilot in 2023 with 5 participants, and then last year went through our second pilot with 5 public and 5 anonymous participants, and have gotten some really great feedback from those 2 pilots that we've incorporated and are now excited to roll this out to the broader space. So I can just hand it over now to Kathleen and Brad to talk more about their experience and share more about TRFF's leadership. And I think at the end of that presentation, we'll just all have time to ask any questions and be in discussion, and happy to hop back in to respond to any questions that folks have overall. So I'll hand it over to you, Kathleen.
Great. Thanks, Nicole. And thank you to Intentional Endowments Network, not only for inviting us to share, but also for putting this together. I think it was for us, we were the first foundation. I know the first cohort was with Endowments, so it was a great opportunity to get to experience this with you. I am going to give a little bit of an overview of who TRFF is, and then I'll pass it to Brad to talk about the process that we went through. He was really a key partner for me and the Russell Family Foundation, and has been, but particularly through this process. So the Russell Family Foundation, we are a place-based foundation. We were founded in 1999 when George and Jane Russell sold Russell Investments. And we're located in Washington State, and where our mission is to invest in people and places to advance environmental sustainability and address the climate crisis. I think I can advance these. There we go. Our program areas are catalytic climate finance, which actually that program leads with our investments and is complemented with the grant making. Food for climate solutions, environmental education are both grant making portfolios that are also employing impact investments in supplementing the grant capital that's being deployed. And we have an operating program called the Jane's Fellowship Program, which is a leadership cohort here in the Pacific Northwest, named after a matriarch, Jane Russell. We deploy at we deploy here at the Russell Family Foundation what I call total resource activation, and really just sharing this to encourage others to think beyond just the grant making being the leading tool that you can use. So we deploy investment capital, grant capital. We think about our networks like IEN and others, convenings and communications to really share the work that we're doing, but also hopefully that others will be sharing the work that they're doing and that we can collaboratively learn together. Before I jump into why we participated, just to set context for our size, so we are about a $75 million foundation. We have a staff of 5, and I am the lead staff member that is overseeing the investment portfolio in partnership with our investment committee. And because of our size, we really rely on our investment advisor, Brad Harrison, and the AlTi team. So I'm going to pause and let Brad introduce himself, and then I'll jump in and share why we wanted to participate.
Thanks, Kathleen, and I'll jump right into the study. We participated last year. It was a great experience for us. We learned a ton, and there were a number of outcomes from it. And I will, if you flip to the next slide, share the results. You know, we're all about transparency, which is a key pillar of the study. So these are our results. They included scoring around 4 different areas: strategy, management, governance, and transparency. And the foundation scored highly, but what I think is more importantly is that, you know, as more and more organizations do this, the relevance of the scoring matters more. It's like with any benchmarking study, it'll become more meaningful and actionable for the field. So just to point to a few specifics within the ratings distribution, within the strategy section, and I'm going to try to be as practical as I could possibly be for any advisors who are on the phone or on the Zoom or any other interested parties who want to, you know, get into this. Within strategy, the Russell Family Foundation came into this with like a definite position of strength. They've been transitioning the portfolio towards impact for over 20 years. The majority of the assets are seeking impact aligned with the foundation's mission. But as we were going through the study last year, we were about 1.5 years into a very ambitious net zero strategy that we have. So we're seeking to drive the portfolio emissions down to 0. And we've done this through, or we're trying to accomplish this through a number of different ways. One is part of the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, which we've set very ambitious emissions portfolio reduction targets. The Russell Family Foundation is very focused on climate, but has also set a number of diversity, equity, and inclusion targets that we've been baselining. So that was all part of the strategy section of the the benchmarking study, and we provided a lot of documentation, which I'll show on the next slide. Within the management section, the foundation has been actively ensuring that really all of the portfolio management selection asset allocation targets has been really aligned with net zero and diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as part of that, we shared a number of due diligence reports, committee minutes, proxy voting records, engagement plans, and other things. Where we failed a little bit short, quite honestly, was on the collective action front. So what more could we do with other organizations related to our work within the management category, particularly around asset allocation? Within the governance section, where we score pretty highly, the foundation has been actively recruiting committee members, investment committee members, through a very open process, which has been led to a number of really great investment committee members who have joined the committee, who provide a great deal of oversight and governance to what we're doing, which has been good. A number of governance documents are included in the study, which is part of the process. And then within transparency, another area where we could do better, but I think we've done well, is that the Russell Family Foundation discloses all of the investments that it makes on its website in a very transparent way, as well as the new investment policy statement that we created about 1.5 years ago. More can be done here, which I'll touch on in a second. And if you want to flip to the next slide. So just one thing I thought would be helpful in this webinar was just like what's involved in the process, frankly, from like a practitioner's perspective. I think 10 hours is reasonable over 4 to 6 weeks, maybe more, maybe less, but it's a document creation process, including a number of things related to the 4 areas that are outlined: strategy, management, governance, transparency. Definitely a review of the investment policy statement. We went through that in great detail. We also went through an assessment on the foundation's diversity, equity, inclusion practices and baselining that we had done, as well as the carbon emissions reporting that we have been going through very actively. So we're, as I mentioned, the foundation is part of the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. We've been doing annual baselining on Scope 1, 2, and 3 carbon emissions, and we've been actively setting interim reduction targets, which was discussed with the folks at Bluemark. Within the management category, the foundation has a very specific mission, theory of change, and impact strategy, which is outlined really in the investment policy statement. So we went through that in great detail. There was also a number of inquiries around the due diligence process that goes through on the investment managers that we invest in throughout the portfolio. So we shared a lot of investment material with the team, as well as performance reporting and all of the ongoing monitoring that we do on any new investment. In terms of governance, all of the policy making related to the organization was a key upload in this. Who are the decision makers? How frequently was it being reviewed? What is the selection process? And then transparency, as I mentioned, one area that the Russell Family Foundation could do better on is increased transparency related to impact reporting. Public commitments were rated really highly in terms of the commitments to the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance and Belonging Pledge and a handful of other diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. But impact reporting was an area that we felt slightly short. You go to the next slide, Bella. As much as this is a benchmarking study, what I've really got value out as a an advisor to the foundation, who's worked with the foundation a long time, really is around the assessment and the feedback from Bluemark. And these are just a few snippets. They're a little bit related to a little bit in the weeds on the Russell Family Foundation's portfolio specifically. But I think they're really illustrative of, what can be done here as it relates to the overall goals of this program. For example, we have an aspirational portfolio, which some foundations would call a catalytic portfolio or something else, but it's a small portion of the portfolio where we allocate really to really high impact strategies. And they thought that was an area that we could really tighten up the focus of it, be it a place-based focus, an impact focus, whatever else. And I totally agreed with their assessment. Like when we drafted this 6 or 7 years ago, it was, pretty broad. We were piloting it out. But that was an area that they thought we could do better, and I agreed. The second one was really around engagement. And this is an area where, as the committee is focused on, we really need to get tighter on our engagement strategy, shareholder engagement, proxy voting in particular, but particularly aligned with our Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance strategy. And then third really was around transparency, which I mentioned earlier. I think the Russell Family Foundation has been a leader in being as transparent as possible, or as they could be, but more transparency around impact reporting, specific impact metrics when we make an investment decision, and tracking the progress of those things. So just a few like very specific examples, I think, related to the foundation, but these are things that we're taking to the committee, having active discussions on, and really value the process. It was rigorous, but not onerous, I would say.
Well, thanks, Brad, for sharing those, and we can probably take down the slides. I think from my perspective and for the audience, we did have a platinum score, and that's because we've been doing this work for quite a long time, like Brad said. So we did have a lot of the materials, but that's, over 2 decades of building the work. So I really encourage audience members that wherever you are on your journey, the reason we participated in this was that we have a third party, somebody like Bluemark, who's really able to look at what we're doing and to provide us the feedback and the ways to improve our policies. That was our real driver. So I encourage wherever you are on the journey that this is a way to just continue to hone what you're doing. I also appreciate Intentional Endowments Network going into another cohort because, as we said, the more participants and the more commonality that we have across various foundations and endowments, it just gives us that opportunity to be thinking about how are we measuring. And we know in the impact investing field, there's so many different ways and different tools. Just some consistency across peers, I think, is very helpful. So we're happy to answer any questions that people who are considering the endowment benchmark have.